Thank you very much for that introduction. I trust you can see my screen okay, Catherine?
Yeah, that's all fine.
Lovely. Well, I'm talking about buying a recorded terminal sire tonight. I'm specifically talking about those rams with the genetic attributes that are going to influence the slaughter generation. It doesn't actually matter what production system we're talking about, whether it's people that are selling on a live weight or dead weight or store basis. Growth and carcass traits are important in all of our sheep production systems. And I'm also hoping that if I do a good job tonight, I might get invited back to do another one on buying a recorded ram to breed female replacements further down the line. So the first thing I'll do is a quick overview to who you're listening to. So I'm a breeding specialist with AHDB and also head up Signet Breeding Services, based in Norfolk, and I'm also lucky enough to have been a Nuffield scholar in my time. And there's a quick photo of me there looking young and youthful before I actually had children. So there we go. So a little bit about Signet Breeding Services. Signet's actually been going in slightly different guises for over 40 years, collecting data on the performance and the relationships between sheep in pedigree ram producing flocks. We record over 25 different breeds and scan out 40,000 lambs every year using our ultrasound scanning service. And we've gone from having 7 traits when I started to well over 20 different traits to enable us to select our sheep. So really large numbers of animals involved in performance recording. And breeders can send in paper data, but in recent years, we've developed an online service and also electronic service for those people that just want to ping us the outputs from their farm software. So we've been able to reduce costs as a result and bring a few more people on board. So that's a little bit about what we do within Signet. What I'm going to try and focus on tonight is very much the commercial outputs from the recording services. And as I say, although we record sort of maternal and hill breeds, tonight is all about the terminal sire breeds. Now, the things we're going to look at is interpretation of EVPs for terminal sires, what it all means, why the breeding values are important, and then a little bit on EVPs in action via our RAM Compare project, just touching on some of the results within that massive project. So the first thing to say is that looks can be very deceptive when it comes to buying a ram. If we head off and buy the biggest, most beautiful looking ram at a sale, we might get the one with the best genetics. We've probably found the person with the biggest feed bill, and we've probably found maybe one of the older animals, maybe it's been out and about on the show circuit. Because there's lots of things that influence the appearance of a ram. Nutrition is a big one, but also its health, its age, whether it's born a single or a twin, and the year that it's born in will all have an impact, as well as its genetics. And in a nutshell, that's what recording's trying to do, to tease out all of those different influences, all of which we pick up in the data, and identify animals solely on the basis of their genetics, regardless of how well they've been fed. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that a ram passes on to his progeny is through his genetic potential. That's the only bit that you're going to see expressed. So that's how we should be selecting our rams. We do it when it comes to buying semen for the dairy herd. We do it when it comes to selecting serial varieties or a new type of tractor. We want performance data, and we should do the same when it comes to buying our rams. So how do we assess performance? Well, it's all about data collection. So firstly, we have a very large database of pedigree information, so we know about the relationships between animals. So the ram that you see in front of you at a sale may well have information on many generations of animals, brothers, sisters, parents, and relatives. And to that, we actually add performance data. So information about ease of birth, birth weight, weight at 8 weeks of age, and measurements later on in life that we're going to talk about during the presentation. That data is analysed to tease out all the non-genetic influences, and from that we're left with estimated breeding values, EBVs, which rank animals according to their genetic merit for specific traits. And we've got about 7 different traits that influence growth and carcass traits that we're going to talk about this evening. That data is also pulled together into an overall index. So that enables us to take into account the relative merit of growth versus muscling versus the costs of fatness, so that we can rank animals according to their overall carcass merit. So the first traits to think about would be 8-week weight and scan weight EBVs. They're very closely correlated to one another, and that's all about increasing the weight of lambs that we have to sell, whether that's store lambs or finished lambs, and it'll also influence the speed with which they can be finished. Animals with high scan weight EBVs typically will reach slaughter weights earlier and can leave the farm earlier. But we do have to remember that these attributes will only be expressed under appropriate management. So if you've got phenomenal genetics but very poor health status or very limited grass, which might be something that people can sympathize with this year in particular, then it's going to be harder for these genes to be expressed. You need all of those attributes for a high performance sheep flock. But at the end of the day, if you've done all you can to improve forage and health, then the limiting factor on performance is going to be your genetics, and hence the importance to get a good ram. In terms of interpretation, all of these breeding values are in units of real measurement. So a scan weight EBV of +4 means that the animal you're looking at has the genetic potential to be 4 kilograms heavier than a ram with an EBV of 0. And because he passes half of his genetic merit on to his progeny, you would expect them to be an extra 2 kilograms heavier, again, than a ram with an EBV of 0. And the same would be true for 8-week weight. So those are the growth traits. One of the big breakthroughs in performance recording has been the use of ultrasound scanning. So very similar to the pregnancy scanner, but using a slightly different head. We part the wool just below the last rib on the third lumbar vertebrae, behind the ribs, and that's where we take a measurement of the muscle depth of the loin, muscling at the deepest point, and then we'll take 3 measurements of fat depth. And that's a fantastic way to actually get under the skin of the animal and assess carcass conformation. We spend lots of time handling these animals, particularly in the show ring. You see people handling the loin, and I often wondered myself whether they're actually handling muscle or handling fat, particularly in these very well-fed animals. The ultrasound cuts right through that and identifies animals with superior muscling. 2 breeding values, muscle depth and fat depth. Both of them can be used to enhance carcass quality, particularly in terms of that muscling across the loin. We need to remember that while it's probably advisable to optimize the amount or maximize the amount of muscle on the carcass, when it comes to fat depth, it's all about an optimum. So animals with very big positive fat depths are more likely to produce overfat carcasses. Or carcasses that you struggle to take to weight without them being penalized for being overfat. Equally, if we're looking at some of the continental heavily muscled breeds, a very big negative fat depth when you've already got high muscle and high growth might mean that you've got rams whose progeny are taking longer to finish and will finish, but will finish at higher weights than might be desired. So on many farms these days, they'll tend to select for high growth, high muscle, and relatively average fat depths, avoiding extremes in either direction to ensure that lambs have the optimum amount of finish when they go to slaughter. And in terms of interpretation, a muscle depth EBV of +2 would be an extra 2 mil of muscle across the loin compared with a ram with an EBV of 0, and again, half of that potential is going to be passed on to his progeny. In terms of fat depth, well, here we'd be looking for negative figures if we wanted to produce leaner progeny. So a ram with a fat depth EBV of -2 would give you a millimeter less muscle, give you a millimeter less fat than a ram with an EBV of 0. And again, half of that's being passed on. If you wanted them to be slightly fatter, then you'd be looking for a positive value there. So we've had ultrasound scanning for many years, the sort of the icing on the cake has been the use of the CT scanner, and that's actually been down at Stoneleigh today. It's been the coolest part of Stoneleigh Park because of the refrigerators that go within that and the cooling system. And here we give lambs a very light sedative, put them on their back, and they go through the CT scanner, and with those images, which we can see here, we can actually look at the total muscle, fat and bone yield within the carcass. It's the equivalent of dissecting the live animal, but of course we've still got the live animal there ready for us to use. So we can look at total lean weight in the carcass, total fat weight in the carcass, and we can also look at the width of the gigot. You can see here at the top that we're getting an image of gigot, and we can look at the width of the gigot relative to the length of the cannon bone and select blockier animals, again using the CT scanner. So really useful technology that many of the top flocks will use for selecting stock rams they want to use themselves. Because the traits are related to each other, we actually get predictors of lean weight and predictors of fat weight for all of the animals in the evaluation, because if we know something about their growth and ultrasound muscle characteristics, we can actually predict how much lean weight there is in the carcass, and then we can use CT to refine that prediction. So lean weight EBVs will help to enhance the yield of meat in the carcass, and we can avoid high levels of fat. One of the interesting things from Ram Compare was it showed the very close tie-up between the lean weight EBV and the overall carcass weight. It's probably a better prediction than scan weight EBV when it comes to predicting which animals will have the best progeny for carcass weight. Again, fat depth, we're probably looking for an optimum, and a sort of a reminder there that when it comes to fat, then we actually need to think about the ewe breeds that we're going to be putting our rams to, and also our production systems and the amount of concentrate or forage that's being used in the diet, because that will influence the amount of finish, and also our end market. In terms of interpretation, lean weight EBV of +1, an extra kilo of muscle in the carcass, and a fat weight EBV of, let's say, -1, would be a kilo less fat in the carcass than a ram with an EBV of 0. So these are traits that we quite often overlook, but are quite useful, particularly if we're selling on a dead weight basis. The other breeding value that I haven't put up here is gigot muscularity, but exactly the same philosophy in the background. A high value means an animal with a much wider gigot and progeny that will have much wider gigots when they're slaughtered. How to interpret the information? Well, you'll sometimes see it up on cards like this sale card here. And again, this is an animal with a scan weight of 8.8, so the breeding potential to an extra 8.8 kilos heavier. You've got muscle and fat depth shown there, and then an overall breeding index. Those figures are interesting, but for a relative comparison, you really need the breed benchmark that we can see. So this is a breed benchmark showing where an animal sits, what's average, top 25%, top 10% for a breed, and then that puts this animal's performance in context. That's useful, but a better way of presenting the data is actually the bar chart formation that we see at many sales. So this is a ram with his bar chart showing the top 2 breeding values in yellow are maternal traits. So litter size indicating the prolificacy of his daughters, maternal ability indicating the milking ability of his daughters, both of which we can tease out from the data. And then you'll see that he's got a breeding value for 8-week weight, scan weight. So this is a ram that's extreme for his scan weight, because the line down the middle represents the average performance of the current population. He's good for muscle depth, and he's got a slightly negative fat depth, so giving slightly leaner progeny. And overall, it would appear to have quite a good index relative to the rest of the population. We can see he's been scanned. And the other thing that I haven't talked about so much are the accuracy figures. So you can see them presented here alongside the EBVs. Animals with very, very high accuracies tend to be stock rams, rams with lots of progeny on the ground and lots of data, particularly if they're high for maternal traits. It indicates lots of daughters have been measured. Typically, you'll see animals with figures of 60 or 70 if they're young, unproven rams that have been measured themselves but are being sold as young rams out into the commercial industry. So it gives you a bit of an idea how much data there is behind an animal's record. So we've talked about how to interpret the data and what to look for. If you're locating a recorded ram, there's lots of sources of information. So Signet produce lists of the people that are involved in recording particular breeds. And through the Signet website, you can also click onto the BASCO website, the animal search facilities, and that gives you information about all of the Suffolks, Texels, and Hampshire Downs within the country, and all of the sheep in other breeds such as Charolais, Meatlinks, Clins, etc., that are recorded with Signet. There's a vast wealth of information, and as I say, it goes back 40 years. So here's an example. We've clicked onto the BASCO website. We've put in details, so we're looking for a Charolais ram here called Peleus, not least because there are not many Peleuses on the database. I can put in his name. Alternative card, and it will pull up their information. So you can go home tonight and actually put in details of your stock rams, and if you've got pedigree rams on the database, you can bring up their details and have a look at their performance. From that, we can produce a chart with all the different breeding values for this particular animal, and we can also see his pedigree, and we can see progeny details for that ram, and we can click on those and see their breeding merit. For the pedigree breeders that might be listening, if we click on this little icon here, we can produce a chart, the simple chart to print and take to sales, that's in a nice user-friendly format. And another piece of information that won't really worry commercial producers too much, but this little F value here that's shown on the website, well, that's actually an animal's in-breeding value. So if you see animals with very, very high values there, you'll often find common animals within their ancestry. And that just means that in the next generation, you need an outcross. So that's how to find the information. We've talked all about how to use the information, but the key bit is, well, why select a ram with EBVs? Well, there's quite a few reasons that we've elaborated on, but typically it's the financial benefit that's of interest to us. And there've been many trials over the years that have talked about a £2.50 or £3 a lamb benefit. I thought I'd use a little bit of data that brings it right up to speed from our Ram Compare project. So Ram Compare is a large commercial progeny test, a bit like those done and undertaken in New Zealand or Australia and in Ireland. In this scenario, we're bringing together a whole number of different terminal sires of different breeds and testing them under a common commercial environment. There's more information there on the website, and as all good things, we've got a Twitter handle as well to have a look at. So the background to the project is that we're working with Sainsbury's, Dunbeer, Randall Parker to collect data under commercial conditions, and it was to see how these rams perform under a largely forage-based environment, and also to see if we can collect abattoir data, so carcass weight, conformation, fat class, and days to slaughter. Can we produce breeding values from that data? And how do those breeding values relate to the things that we've measured on farm for decades, scan weight, muscle depth, fat depth, for example? There's a number of partners involved in the project, and we've actually currently got 9 commercial flocks, all with at least 400 ewes, some of them much bigger, collecting data on about 3,000 lambs a year. So we're about to put we're getting on for 180, 190 rams that will have been on test by the end of next year. Farms are dotted all over the country. I just put them up on a map in case there's one near you, because we tend to have events every couple of years on these farms, and anyone's very welcome to come along, see what they're doing, seeing what we're measuring, and have a discussion about terminal sire rams and their relative genetic merit. And you can see, so England, Scotland, Wales, and actually a research institute in Northern Ireland as well, collecting data. And if there's pedigree breeders that want to get involved in the project, they can do that by nominating rams or putting semen forward that we might want to use on the project. Vast amount of data is being collected, and we're not going to spend long on it tonight, but we're collecting information about the number of live lambs and the ease with which lambs are born, weighing lambs throughout their lifetime, measuring them for muscle and back fat, collecting abattoir data, and then collecting some data on tenderness of the meat and also the yield of the primals, because again, there's some more measurements here that we can take that will help tailor our breeding programs. So quite a large scale project with some interesting outcomes. And while we're not talking about the ranking of rams tonight and where they sit in the scheme, we can actually tease out some of this data to show some of the value. So although we've tended to use very, very high genetic merit rams on test, we're still finding significant differences between them. So this is some data from Duncan's farm. We pulled together 3 of his top rams there and compared them to a stock ram that we know to be of more average performance on the farm. And we can see that in doing that, he lifted carcass weight by 0.7 of a kilo, and there's the best part of 4 pounds a lamb benefit solely through increases in carcass weight through increases in carcass weight. So that's Duncan up in Northumberland. Actually on his organic system, so using a lot of forage up there. And if we move to Gloucestershire, we've got Philip and Charlie using, again, our high index rams on their Clin flock. And you can see this is an example where we've picked out a ram very high in terms of carcass conformation, and we've picked out a more ordinary one that's come through on test. And we can see from the results of the progeny, we've increased carcass weights by about a kilo, slight reduction in days to slaughter, and also a significant proportion more lambs hitting market specification, both in terms of conformation and fat class. And again, that's worth a good £5 per lamb premium. So what's an extra £4 a lamb worth? Well, in relatively straightforward terms, if we look at mating 50 ewes a year, 1.5 lambs a piece, that's an extra £300 a season, purely from choosing one ram over another. Over their working lifetime, you'd be looking to get 4 years out of the ram. That's going to be an extra £1,000 worth of benefit. And again, although you may pay a little more perhaps for a recorded ram or one of very high genetic merit, I would suggest that small extra investment is more than repaid from the performance you get out of these rams. Actually, when it comes to rams, it's very much a buyer's market in terms of the extra reward that can be achieved through investing in recorded genetics. Of course, that does rely on the rams having a long working lifetime. And so it would be sensible for me just to remind everyone of the importance of selecting rams with good structural soundness, particular attention to legs and feet, and also to checking that testicles are firm and that the rams are ready to work. And in addition to that, no signs of infectious disease. In fact, you want to be talking to your ram buyer about the vaccination policy, the health policy on the farm, and also the level of feeding that those animals have been under prior to joining you. We know that one of the dangers in ram production is that we often see animals that are overfed because unfortunately the market still pays a premium for very large, often very fat breeding stock. And until that happens, it's difficult for breeders, whether they're recorded, non-recorded, the temptation to feed animals more because they make more money. Now, we are talking to breeders about ways to avoid that, and there is a blueprint for those that are interested in terms of producing fit-for-purpose rams that are going to go on and have a long working lifetime. So getting the right ram for the farm is a combination of things. Part of it is the genetics and what his progeny are going to do, and the second bit is the number of lambs dropped in his lifetime, and both of those are extremely important. So, in terms of a summary, I think it's very important that a ram's breeding potential is assessed. Time and time again, we've seen animals that have done wondrous things in the show ring, have looked fantastic on the day, and then by the time the progeny have been assessed by my team of technicians, we realized that that was solely due to the credit of whoever was feeding that animal, and that actually genetically those animals are not particularly exciting. So it's important to buy rams with some knowledge. That's true for growth and carcass traits, and it's absolutely vital for maternal traits, because there's no way you can tell a ram's the performance of his daughters solely by looking at him. There are massive opportunities to be had because there have been extremely fast genetic change within our terminal sire populations. We tend to have very large contemporary groups when we record animals. Unlike cattle, we can be breeding in a very short generation interval, and we're typically seeing twins as opposed to singles and measuring hundreds of lambs at a time. So a little example of that is this chart up in the left-hand corner, and that's showing the distribution of Charolais lambs in the year that they started their sire reference scheme in 1990 and in 2015. And you can see that the top 10% of the population, the animals that we raved about, we rushed off to collect semen from and use as our reference rams very widely in the population, if they showed up today, would be in the bottom 10% of the breed. They'd be the first ones you would drop from the flock and send out the door. That's an incredible change in the population of Charolais sheep, recorded Charolais, in that time span, and that shows the degree of difference that you can achieve today through buying a recorded ram. EBVs and breeding indexes are a useful guide to assessing genetic merit, and we've talked about where you can find that information online, as well as expecting to see it in catalogues and on pens when you head to sales, and there's lots more information online as well. Information sources, by all means have a look at the Signet website, and both myself and the Better Returns team are looking forward to the NSA events, one of our favourite events of the year, and so come along and have a chat with us at Malvern as well. So I think that's my summary. Catherine or Katie, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. Right, whilst I'm just waiting for some questions to come in, I'd also just like to remind you that we do have both of the manuals. So the first one you can see on the screen there for buying a Signet recorded ram for terminal sire traits, and then we also have one for those of you that are interested in buying a recorded ram for maternal traits. So they're both available online if you are interested in looking at those in more detail. So Sam, the first question I've had is, how important is it to assess accuracy values?
That's a really good question, because we spend a lot of time telling people about them. The reality is that they're a useful indicator if an animal has been measured or not. But typically when you head to a sale, many of the shearling rams that have been recorded are in a similar boat. They've all got quite a lot of siblings that have been measured, they've been measured themselves, and for growth and carcass traits will all tend to have a similar level of accuracy. In addition to that, the estimated breeding value actually takes into account accuracy at the same time. So if an animal had very, very low accuracy, there would be an element of scaling to prevent it coming to the very top of the list with very little information behind it. So I take a cursory glance at accuracy to make sure it's been recorded, and then I get on with comparing the EBVs, because I know some of that thinking's been done for me within the process. I'd probably, Catherine, the only difference would be if I was looking for semen in the tank and I was interested in maternal traits, you'll see quite a bit of variation in accuracy then, because some rams will have more daughters that have been recorded than others. And if I'm very keen on maternal traits, then I'm looking for high accuracy values for those particular traits. Okay,
brilliant, thank you. Next question is, can we get EBVs for crossbred rams?
At this moment in time, we don't have many crossbred flocks that record with us. There are a few. There's quite a few Suffolk Texels within the analyses. At this moment in time, we tend to do purebred analysis, but I'm very much hoping at the end of the year to launch a multi-breed evaluation, and that will enable us to produce much more accurate breeding values for crossbred rams. Providing that we know about the genetic merit of both the purebred parents, we can take into account hybrid vigor, which we're not doing at the moment, and produce accurate breeding values for those crossbred animals. So I think there's quite a big opportunity there within our terminal sire breeding to produce some information for those animals as well. So that's something that's going to build over time, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm very interested in performance recording, and I'm thinking about starting. What will it cost me?
Oh, what's it cost? Normally the first question I get at meetings. So costs haven't changed a great deal in the last 15 years. We've tried really hard to keep costs so that they're not a barrier. And as you'll be aware, there's quite a lot of levy investment that actually goes into performance recording services to actually support them. Typically, if you're putting data in online, it would be £95 for the flock plus £2.50 for each of the ewes that you're recording. But the £2.50 is on a sloping charge. So big flocks recording 400 or 500 sheep, by the time they get to those numbers, each additional ewe can be sort of £1 or 50 pence, something like that. So there's a sloping scale to encourage medium and large size flocks to come on board. And then if you want to use the ultrasound scanning service, which most flocks do, or certainly most terminal sire flocks do, then that's typically £175 to get the first 100 lambs done. So that's a technician coming out, doing all the biosecurity, setting up on farm, measuring the sheep, sending the data in for evaluation. So really those are the two costs, the recording cost and data analysis, and then the scanning cost. So it's about the price of one good ram each year, either one good one that you've identified that you can use yourself, where you've avoided the cost of bringing in something maybe that you know less about, or one good ram sold out of your pedigree flock.
Okay, thank you. Are EVPs totally independent of production system, or is there some interaction between system and production trait EVPs?
We try our very, very best to make them independent of production system. And certainly each year I can see animals that have been beautifully fed and looked after that come through with low EBVs. And that's the system saying, we know that animal's performance is due to its feeding, but those genetics aren't particularly exciting. And they've probably been tested in other flocks and found to be a little bit wanting. Equally, I can see flocks under much lower level of management, forage run systems, people just having shearlings, running shearlings that are ticking on, much lighter when we measure them, but very high genetic merit. So the system does tease them out. I think the interesting question is whether there's an interaction between the two. So will a ram's progeny rank exactly the same under a high concentrate feeding regime as it would under a forage-based system, maybe when forage is scarce and let's say there's a parasite challenge? And I suspect there's a degree of interaction between the two, although on many, many occasions they will rank in a very similar manner for growth and carcass traits. But what I would say is I think it is important where you do have a choice, to find animals that have been reared in an environment that's not dissimilar to your own. So if you have a particular system where animals are on maybe a forage limiting system, then finding a ram breeder that is very much forage based and is treating animals very, very commercially will have some advantages, because they'll behave in exactly the manner that you would expect on your farm. There'll be less chance of re-ranking. So it's a good question.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that we can learn from the CT scanner?
Well, there's always something you can learn from the CT scanner. The traits that are of interest to me at the moment are spine length and vertebrae number. That's both in the thoracic and the lumbar region within the sheep. And of course, those regions have different values, and there are a different number of vertebrae between the different breeds. So all sheep don't have the same number of vertebrae, either between the breeds or within the breeds. So if we wanted to select for longer sheep or animals that had more chops, then there is a genetic basis to that. We can also use the CT scanner to measure eye muscle area. So for years we've measured depth, but I know my clients would dearly love to measure area. Well, we can do that through the CT scanner. And we can also look at intramuscular fat. So The CT scanner is looking at density when it takes an image, and we can actually look within the loin at the density of the muscle. That's a proxy for intramuscular fat, which is a proxy trait for meat eating quality. And again, in an era where producers may be paid or rewarded on meat eating quality through the supply chain, then that trait becomes of interest as well. So the good news is that I'm hoping by the end of the year to have launched all of those traits as part of a big overhaul to our national evaluation within our multi-breed analysis. The initial genetic results are extremely promising. We're just fine-tuning a few of those elements. So those are some of the extra value areas that we can get through the CT scanner.
Great, thank you. And last question, are there other traits to value if I'm keeping my own female replacement?
There are a number, and it probably depends on the level of performance that you've got at the moment. So if you're looking to lift lambing percentage or increase the number of lambs that are successfully sold, well, then there's really good breeding values that will help you to do that. Obviously, there's variation between breeds, and there are some breeds where we'll want to lift the number of twins produced more quickly than others, but that's a really good attribute. In addition to that, there is a maternal component of growth, which is due to how much milk the ewe produces. And that can be teased out within the analysis, both her milk production and maternal care. And that's the breeding value that we call maternal ability. And again, producers can select strongly on maternal ability to find those rams whose daughters will be particularly milky and produce particularly heavy lambs due to their own maternal performance. Those are the commonly available ones. I'd also suggest people have a little bit of a think about ewe mature size if they're keeping back female replacements, and they might want to back away in some breeds from some of the very, very high growth rate animals. If it's going to lead to just an increase in mature size, that may have an impact on ewe efficiency. Within the Clin breed, we have breeding values now for ewe longevity, so identifying breeding lines that will last longer in the population, and also age at first lambing. We have breeding values influencing lambing ease, and there's obviously an importance there, and also breeding values for lamb survival. Again, that one's just available within Clins at this moment in time. They're also the breed that have done an incredible amount of work on parasite resistance, so breeding values like fecal egg count and saliva IgA. So in the answer to that question, I'm giving you a bit of a spoiler for the next presentation if I get invited back.
Okay, I have just had another question come in, Sam, so I'll just ask you that one because we've got some time.
Yeah.
It sounds as if the CT scanner would be the ideal tool for commercial carcass grading. What are your thoughts, and do you think this technology would become cheap enough for such use?
It would be a really useful tool for doing that because of the level of accuracy. This isn't necessarily my area of expertise, but there certainly are plants that have used basically X-ray image analysis on the line. They have to be able to take those measurements at high throughput, and because of the sheer costs of a CT scanner, these are very expensive bits of kit. They are used in very, very big abattoirs, and so I believe they would typically be used in New Zealand, because there's also extra value in terms of you can then measure specifically on the primal cuts and value the carcass according to where you've got the most valuable bits of meat. So the idea of using them is one that has been explored. It's purely on the basis of cost that it makes it more difficult for that to be implemented.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam, for that great presentation, and thank you to everybody who's been listening and for some good discussion. I'd just like to remind you all that the presentation has been recorded and it will be available on the AHDB YouTube channels, along with all of our other previous webinars, should you want to revisit it. Thank you again. Have a good evening, everybody.